When I think about things left unfinished, I think about there's a hotel in North Korea, and it is called the Ryojong Hotel. Construction in this hotel began in 1987, and it was supposed to be finished in 2 years. But how many years later, it is still not done. And basically, it's a 105-story building that's shaped as a pyramid. And although from the outside it looks complete, inside it is not. And it is currently the tallest unfinished building in the entire world. And it was just left unfinished. And that was due to economic issues and supply chain management. But you think after almost 20 years they would have finished this thing. But no, it sits right there in the middle of the city, downtown, and it's left unfinished. And as I think about things that have been unfinished, I think about a parable that Jesus taught. This was in Luke chapter 14, verse 28 to 30. And if you have a Bible, please open it up and follow along until we get it on screen. And Jesus said this: "Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, 'This person began to build, but was not able to finish.'" So it is good to start new projects, and we need to start new projects. But I think what's most important is the finishing. This idea of finishing what we begin brings me to our big question today. And the big question is, how do we finish God's work? How do we finish God's work? Because God has given each one of us work to do. He's given us work to do as leaders, as parents, as students, as workers of industry. We all have a lot on our plate. We're all busy. We all have stuff to do. We have stuff to do generally in life, but we have God-given things to do as well. We have kingdom things to do as well. So what are the things, what are these commitments, what are these callings that God has given us to do? I'm sure that most of you guys have experienced sometime in your life a bad transition. Maybe at work, maybe at school, maybe something happened and somebody left unexpectedly. And it created a big absence. It created a void. And the void was felt. I know when I was a student in school, I'd be in elementary or junior high, and the teacher would be away sick for a day or for a week, and then there's this open void, and then we find out we get a substitute teacher coming. I think you guys know how that goes, right? There's a void. Even though there's another presence, there's another person there, that void isn't filled. That absence is felt, and that absence is missed. So there's voids that are left behind. Whereas on the other hand, when a transition is done well, it can be a huge blessing to everybody involved, and it can even leave behind a legacy that will empower other people. So a big idea today is that love demands a succession plan. And we see this big idea in our passage today in Numbers 27. Let's read this. "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Go up to the mountain in the Abiram range and see the land I have given the Israelites. After you have seen it, you too will be gathered to your people.' For when the community rebelled at the waters of Zin, both of you disobeyed my command to honor me as holy before your eyes. Moses said to the Lord, 'May the Lord, the God who gives breath to all living things, appoint someone over this community to go out and come in before them, one who will lead them out and bring them in. So the Lord's people will not be like a sheep without a shepherd.' So the Lord said to Moses, "Take Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom is the spirit of leadership, and lay your hand on him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and the entire assembly, and commission him in their presence. Give him some of your authority, so the whole Israelite community will obey him. He is to stand before Eleazar the priest, who will obtain decisions for him by inquiring of the Urim before the Lord. At his command, he and the entire community of Israelites will go out, and at his command, they will come in." Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and had him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole assembly, and he laid hands on him and commissioned him, as the Lord instructed him through Moses. The first thing we learn through this passage is we must plan for the end. Are there any Star Wars fans here today? Star Wars fans? Okay. There's a couple people, thankfully. So, in my opinion, one of the best movie scenes ever was the first Star Wars movie ever made, called A New Hope. And there's a scene in the movie. It takes place in the Death Star. And Obi-Wan Kenobi is having this lightsaber battle with Darth Vader. And just as Luke is watching them battle, Darth Vader takes up his lightsaber, and Obi-Wan turns and he looks at Luke. And Luke makes eye contact, and he looks at him. And Darth Vader swings his lightsaber, slices him in half, and his life force leaves his body. And Luke cries, "No!" And it's this amazing moment. But I think the thing that makes it the most amazing isn't just the scene itself, but that George Lucas, the one who wrote and directed these movies, he was planning for the end of the entire trilogy in that 30-second scene. Then the rest of that movie and the next two movies would not have been the same if it was not for that scene. Because Obi-Wan Kenobi dying off so suddenly had to happen. And that's what brought about the need for young Skywalker to rise up and take his place and become who he was meant to be. And for those of you here who have never seen the Star Wars movies, but you're watching Obi-Wan Kenobi on Disney Plus now, don't talk to me about spoilers, because you've had 30 years to watch this movie, so too bad if you haven't watched it. If I wrecked it for you, that's how it goes. But he began writing these movies with the end in mind. He knew where he was going. He was planning for the end. And that's what we need to do in life. In Edmonton, we need to do it. In Calgary, we need to do it. In every area of our lives, we need to plan for the end. Moving on. If we can get the next slide there. In every area of our lives, we need to plan for the end. We got to plan. Things happen. And likewise, in our Bible story, Moses, he thought about the end as well. So let's go back to verse 15. Moses said to the Lord, "May the Lord, the God who gives breath to all living things, appoint someone over this community to go out and come in before them, one who will lead them and bring them out, so the Lord's people will not be like sheep without a shepherd." Now let me explain this with some backstory. Moses had messed up as a leader. There was a time where he lost his temper. He disobeyed God's command. And as a consequence for that action, God told him he could not enter the promised land. And now that the people were finally ready to enter the promised land, it was now the end of Moses. He couldn't go any further. He couldn't lead them past a certain point. But Moses didn't wallow in self-pity. He didn't stay in regret and feel sorry for himself. Instead, he asked God for someone to take over his work when he was gone. And the story is preserved in Scripture to show us how a godly person thinks when they do God's work and when they love the people that they serve. Because love demands that we think about how our leaving will impact those around us. Moses is an example for all of us to follow, especially me. God recently reminded me of a time in my life when I hadn't yet learned this lesson. For those of you that don't know, I used to be the youth pastor at the Edmonton church from 2002 to 2009. And I started 20 years ago with the group that is now Lifeline. I know what you're thinking. How can that even be possible since I don't look a day over 30? Because I was the world's first 10-year-old pastor. Okay, I wasn't, but I was definitely young in the ministry, young in the faith, and I had a lot to learn at the time. And in a difficult season in my life, when I felt like I had nothing left to give, I resigned my position. And I left with no succession plan in place. I simply said a prayer and I hoped for the best. And my lack of planning for the end resulted in some pretty amazing people getting hurt. And they got sucked into a void that I left behind. Because I could have been so much better if I'd already learned this lesson, if I had learned to plan for the end. In our passage today, Moses teaches us the importance of planning for the end. This could be the end of a project, the end of a commitment. It could be the end of a family responsibility, even the end of our life. Like Moses, we're all mortal. We're all human, and there is an inevitable end to everything, to every commitment that we make. Eventually, everything will end. The only question is, how will it end? My hope and prayer for this sermon is that sometime today or this week, each one of us will sit with God. We take some time, we sit with God, and we write down a few things that we need to do that will strengthen us and empower us to keep the commitments that God has given us to do. When I think about commitments as a parent, I think of parenting as a series of commitments, as a series of endpoints. When our children are young, they're completely dependent on us. We need to feed them, we need to dress them, we need to do everything for them. As they get older, they learn to do things themselves. They learn to feed themselves, dress themselves, and some responsibilities are lifted. Then they go to school, more responsibilities get taken off of us. They get a job, they become adults, maybe they get married. And in each stage, more responsibilities are lifted off of a parent. Because each step of the way, there's a letting go. And we need to aim to end each stage well, having met certain goals of development along the way. And it's also good to have an emergency plan. Maybe it's writing a will. Maybe it's thinking about just-in-case scenarios. The practical things, responsible things that we need to do as adults as we plan for both the many ends and also the many new beginnings that life offers. And this is true with families, it's true with work, with business, it's true with church, and also with ministry. And if we do our job well, it will set up other people and set up the next generation to be strong and to be successful and to succeed where we leave off. And that brings me to my second point today. And that's we must set up others to succeed. I don't know if you guys know this, maybe you found out at camp, but Lifeline Ministries loves to play volleyball. They love volleyball, and although I'm not as good as them, I still like to hang out with them and watch them play sometimes. And in one of the games I was watching, it was amazing. One of our blockers deflected a ball that the opponents shot over the net. It goes up in the air. Somebody else sets it to Esther. Esther spikes the ball down, scores a point, and wins the game. And it was this amazing play and an amazing game, and it was really cool to watch. And for those of you that know Esther, you know she's not the tallest volleyball player on the planet, but having a great team of other people around her that set her up for success helped the entire team to win the game. And that is exactly what God is calling each one of us to do. And the question we need to ask is, how can we, as believers, set up one another for success? How can we set up our siblings? How can we set up our children? How can we set up one another in this church and in this city and in our families? How can we set other people up for success, to succeed us, so that our ceiling, our roof, our cap will one day become their floor? Because that is the calling of every leader, is to set up the next generation for success. We get an important clue about how to do this in our passage today. So let's go back to verse 18. So the Lord said to Moses, "Take Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom is the spirit of leadership, and lay your hand on him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and the entire assembly, and commission him in their presence. Give him some of your authority, so the whole Israelite community will obey him. He is to stand before Eleazar the priest, who will make decisions for him by inquiring of the Urim before the Lord. At his command, he and the entire community of Israelites will go out, and at his command, they will come in." The takeaway here is God called Moses to set up Joshua for success, to set up Joshua to succeed him and to take his place. And it was a difficult situation for Moses because Moses could not find another guy just like him to replace him. Someone who was both a leader and a prophet. Someone who could talk to God face to face, but somebody who everybody else respected and followed like a general. Moses' relationship with God was unique. He was the only one that could communicate directly with God, something that was only typical for the high priest to be able to do. So he was this priest, he was this prophet, but he was also this pastor, he was also this leader. And it was an amazing set of skills and gifts that God had gave to Moses. And at the time, there was no one on earth like Moses. So God replaced Moses with two people: Joshua to do leadership, and Eleazar the priest to receive directions from God. And Moses made all of this public so that everyone would know. There was transparency. He got everybody on board. And leading up to Joshua's commissioning, Moses spent the time with Joshua. He invested in Joshua, in his life and in his future, to teach him the things he needs to know to set him up for success. And Joshua was a great choice. He had already served Moses faithfully for years. He was one of the original people that exited out of Egypt. He had successfully completed a mission as a spy that entered the land of Canaan. He was the best choice and the person to carry on the work and the legacy of Moses. But the key is Joshua never tried to copy Moses. If he had tried to just become another Moses, he would have failed badly, because he'd be pretending to be someone that he wasn't. Instead, Joshua had to become the best version of Joshua. And this was God's provision. That it didn't have to be a direct replacement, but that God would provide for his people in another way. And I think we can all learn from the story that we don't need to make a clone of ourselves. We don't need to just replicate and make a copy of ourselves, but God will always make another way. We just have to help people to become the best that they can be for God. And God will take care of the rest. We need to find a way to deal with the gap that we leave behind. And maybe it will mean asking 2 or 3 people to replace you. Maybe it will mean some of the things you currently do now are needed in the future. But it is a tremendous blessing, a tremendous service to everybody else, whether it's in a company, in a school, in a church, in a family. It's a tremendous blessing when we can find that kind of creative solution to get everyone on board with us. And the ideal scenario is that when we leave, we already have a succession plan in place, and that we've already raised up the next leaders while we're still there to support them and invest in them. So to conclude today, I just want to recap this important question in life. And I just want to recap, how do we finish God's work? And I think what we've learned from our Bible story today is that love demands a succession plan. So whatever commitment we make in any area of life, we must plan for the end. And we must set up others to succeed. And if we do that, we know that we're following God's plan. And if we know that we're following God's plan, we can expect God's help. We can expect God's grace in His provision to do what He's called us to do. And with that, I wanted to close and pray. God, I pray that you help us to be good leaders like Moses. God, that you help us be good parents, teachers, workers, people who plan ahead. God, people who will commit to finish and end well, so that we can set other people up for success. God, so that we can raise up the next generation to have the best possible future. God, we thank you for this, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.